Today, Vijay Thomas will be talking to us on the role of MR spectroscopy in neurology. Dr. Bijoy, if you are ready, you may start your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Rijo and Kraskochi. Can you all hear me?
Yes, very much. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So today we will talk about H1MR spectroscopy in neurology. So I will be talking mostly about neurological applications, but some neurosurgical applications as well. So when you look at the spectroscopy, the whole concept was actually conceived in the 1920s as a nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy or spectrometry, and which was later in the 1940-46 by Howard and Stanford scientists Blow and Purcell and their team developed it into real science, and which was extensively used in chemistry even before our MRI was discovered. They were using a technique called field sweep, and later when MRI was discovered, the use of the spectroscopic applications to medicine was actually put in, and which led on to for the first time visualization of metabolites and the chemical composition of structures in vivo. So MRI is a non-invasive method providing metabolic information about the body, and the detect abnormalities invisible to MRI when it was first introduced thought that it is one-stop answer to all the questions we had. But now we know that it should not be interpreted as an individual investigation choice. It should always be interpreted only as adjuvant to clinical MRI studies. So when you look at what is the basis of this MR spectroscopic event, spectroscopy you can actually use in a human body is that around the nuclei there are electrons, and this electron cloud is actually changing the Lambda frequency a bit. If you look at the Lambda frequency equation, omega 0 is equal to or proportional to gamma B0, where gamma is the chiromatic ratio and B0 is the main magnetic field. But in the real situation, actual situation, it's like the equation is actually changed to omega 0 is proportional to gamma B0 into 1 minus sigma. 1 minus sigma is contributed by the electron cloud. And this electron cloud produces a chemical shift so that there is a specific chemical signature of each of these molecules in the tissues, which is also again interacting with each other, which is the basis of a spin coupling and the J coupling, which I'll explain in the next slides. So understand this physics is not really important for us to actually interpret the spectroscopic images, but if you know this, it is well and good, and actually you can actually interpret it in a much better fashion. What we are actually in the image, we are looking at the stimulated echo, or the spin echo, or actually a reversed echo, which is actually giving us a lot of signal. But in the MR spectroscopy, we are looking at the free induction decay and the chemical shift frequencies associated with that. For the time domain, we are actually shifting into the frequency domain, and we are actually representing it in a ppm scale, which I will explain in a short while from now. So one of the most important things about spectroscopy is that which machine you are using, and also what is the shim level you are confident with. So many people say that they don't get a good spectrum because your shim is not good, your technical considerations are not good. Spectroscopy requires a lot of actually technical know-how, and also optimization of your scanners and the sequences, and also before each scan you are supposed to actually shim your system, and it is a technically demanding thing. But having said that, most of the newer magnets, newer systems are actually capable of doing it everything automatically, so they can get a very robust clinical spectrum in a matter of few minutes. So the voxel placement is very important. What sort of spectroscopy you are using is a single voxel spectroscopy or multiple voxel spectroscopy, otherwise called chemical shift imaging. You are using the outer volume suppression bands, which are very important. I'll explain, because most of the time we don't give importance to these things, and the prevention of intervoxel contamination bleed is very important, and the shim is very important, and the post-processing and the quantitation ratios and the pitfalls you should be aware. So if you look at this, if you are there are many ways to doing spectroscopy, your point result spectroscopy, steam, and several other methods, and the most recently very quantitative spectroscopy, whole brain spectroscopy, everything is possible. My relation with the spectroscopy is sort of love and hate, love at first sight because it gives you a lot of information. Then you get frustrated because you are not very specific in actually giving your diagnosis. Again, when with the advances, you can actually do much more better things. So it is actually a really useful thing, but you should know what are the limitations of this sequence. For example, this is a single voxel spectroscopy which I kept very near to the Peters bone. You are actually seeing a lot of background noise. Your baseline is not very clear, and you are not going to interpret this image very well. So this is multivoxel spectroscopy. So this is chemical shift imaging. I'm not telling that multivoxel spectroscopy is going to give always better images. What I'm telling is that when you are doing, you have to be very careful. You should be away from the susceptible areas. And I will talk about these basic spectral and all in a while. And the beauty is that in multivoxel spectroscopy or chemical shift imaging, you can actually create these metabolite maps, which will be of very immense use to the surgeons, especially when they are actually looking at areas of biopsy. And this is really useful for the surgeon. So this is what I was actually. This is the volume we are going to excite. I hope you can see my my screen and the arrow. And we have to shim the system very well, and also we have to put outer volume suppression in order to suppress contamination and also background noise from the adjacent tissues. We can put multiple outer volume suppression bands. The first band will be the most strongest. So if you are actually doing something here, you have to put the first band actually, covering the Peters bone and the skull base. And all the other bands, the second bands will be the second strongest, so they will less stronger, and you have to put it to cover all the areas, especially the skull bone, and the areas of susceptibility should be covered very well, and the air tissue interface also should be covered very well. So what are the sequences available? Everybody knows that nowadays we usually press a point result spectroscopy sequence because the signal is really good, and we usually use a low TE or intermediate TE and a really long TE. So do we need to use all these things because it is very time consuming? Not really required, because there is depending on the expertise and experience, people use different things. Some people use only low TE spectroscopy. We prefer to use an intermediate TE spectroscopy first, and if it is really required, only we will do a low TE. But the low TE has got a specific advantages, especially when you are talking about metabolic disorders. The longest TE is seldom used, only when it is used for absolute quantification of sometimes in research, and also to prove that some metabolites are actually changing phases. So that is what we can actually see in spectroscopy. So we can do see the NAA, which is representing the brain spectroscopy. You see NAA. NAA is at a 2.02 or 2 parts per million. Why this is represented in parts per million is because across the scan strengths we can have a uniform standard. For example, water and fat are separated by 115 hertz, and in 1 Tesla, and it's in 225 hertz in 1.5 Tesla. So if you want to mug up all these things in every higher magnet, it is not going to be easy. And some trivia why we are actually writing the ppm scale from to the left to the right is basically because previously I told that Blow and Purcell and all the other subsequent researchers were using in a NMR spectrometry. They were using a technique called field sweep. For example, our MR magnet, for a particular magnet, the field is constant. For example, a 1.5 Tesla magnet is a 1.5 Tesla magnet, and a 3 Tesla is a 3 Tesla magnet. We only shift the RF frequency or a gradient. We use the gradient actually to make the gradient. So they were not using like that. They were actually using different. They were keeping the RF constant, and they were using the field variations in order to create this spectrum, and that is why they use this spectrometry, and that way they used this. This was the convention in which the lower from the higher is used from left to right, and in order to keep the spectrum of the previous before MRI the same as after MRI, they were using it as continuing the convention in the MR spectroscopy also. The modern scanners can actually represent it in the left, right or right, left anyway, but this is the convention which is followed. So if you look at the literature, it is studied with a lot of ratios: choline creatine ratio, Na by creatine ratio, choline by Na plus creatine ratio. If you ask me, choline by creatine ratio or any of these ratios is one of the biggest lie I have ever heard in medical history, because the choline creatine ratio of more than 1.7 is supposed to be a high grade tumor. If you put a spectroscopy, if you do a spectroscopy in a stroke patient in an infarct area, you can get areas where choline by creatine ratio is very high. That is because the creatinine is because representing the energy metabolism, creatinine will be entirely low and in an infarcted tissue. So the choline creatinine ratio is can be spuriously high. So this ratio, as far as we are concerned, is not going to help us much in actually. But having said that, because we cannot do absolute quantification, we can actually compare between subsequent scans, we still use these ratios, but in a different way, which I'll explain in a few seconds. So choline is a marker for a cell membrane turnover. Choline is at 3.2 ppm. This is the choline, and this is the creatine, which is sort of a stable metabolite, but it's also not stable. Creatine is a marker of energy metabolism. It is at 3 ppm. So these are the main peaks which we are interested in. Then at 3.9 ppm, there is another peak, which is a second creatine or a methylene group of creatine, which is actually represented. Then in 1.3, sometimes you can see lactate, especially in pathological conditions. Then there are a lot of other minor metabolites which are of interest to us, which will not go into the details. And this angle, everybody knows that normally in a patient or in a human being more than the age of 2.5 years, Na should be the highest peak compared to choline and creatine. So choline, creatine, and Na, that will be the normal appearance in an adult. But what happens in a tumor or a pathology is the Na comes down and the choline goes up. So this angle, the relationship changes. So this is called a Hunter's angle. People use it very interestingly to diagnose tumors, but it can be seen in any pathology, because when the Na comes down, you can see this. So this is what I was talking about when you look at the choline and creatine. If you see that, this is what happens. It's a very tall, a fat man. If you assume that his height is only 6 feet, height is 6 feet, and his width is almost 3 feet. The ratio of height by width is again 2. In a small man with a 4 feet high and it's only 2 feet wide, again height to width ratio is 2. So you are not going to differentiate. If somebody gives this ratio of 2, you are not getting a picture of how fat or how tall this guy is, or short or thin this guy is. So this is what choline creatine ratio is doing. So choline creatine ratio is not going to diagnose anything per se. So unless you are actually comparing it with your MR imaging. So, but it is still useful. Why? Because in the tumors you wanted to see where the tumor is, and also peritumoral edema. So if there is an increased choline in the immediate or within 1 centimeter peritumoral edema, we know that it is a primary tumor, high grade tumor, not a metastasis. Metastasis, immediately that the choline will be diluted in the vasogenic edema adjacent. And if you can compare the choline to choline ratio from the opposite mirror image voxel, and you get a better idea of doing that. We will not go into the details. Well, this is what I was talking about, this metabolic maps, choline by Na or choline by creatine ratios, where if we can create these maps for the neurosurgeon, it will be very useful for them, because we have actually done a blinded study where the surgeon is actually taking a biopsy based on highest enhancing area versus a high choline or high perfused area. We found that the yield of a higher grade malignancy is much higher if you are using a multivoxel spectroscopy or a perfusion area compared to the maximum enhancing areas. So coming to tumor mimics also, it is very useful, and this is a tumefactory demyelination. If you look at, there are several layers. The actively enhancing area or actively demyelinating area will show a diffusion restriction and enhancement. If you look at microscopy, you can see that the choline Na or the lactate is highest in the central necrotic area, and the choline is highest in the peripheral area. And coming to some of the other neurological applications, this is a young male with headache, vomiting. Everybody knows that is an abscess because this is diffusion restricted. What sort of an abscess it is? So then in these cases, you have to do both T30 and 135. You see that T135, you can see several peaks. For the interest of time, I will not explain everything, but this is a 0.9 ppm. You see an inverted peak. This is a cytosolic amino acid, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And then you see the fat component or the fat macromolecular complex, one which is going up at 1.3 in the 135 intermediate TE, the upward peak is lipids and the downward peak is actually lactate. At 1.48, you see an alanine peak. and then you see a small acetate, and then the succinate at 2.4 ppm. And this is again 30 we will do. You see, because you can actually see these metabolites much better. You see that lactate and alanine is actually going up, and this is the small acetate peak. Should not be mistaken for an Na. Na is at 2.02, acetate is at 1.9, and so it's like this is going to be a little difficult. And you see this succinate is a higher peak. So if you see this from this MR and MRI, if you look at the only spectroscopy, it can be a parasitic infection, it can be many things, it can be even a metabolic disorder. But if you look at the MR imaging, because we already know that this is an abscess, and if you see all these metabolites, minor metabolites, we already know that it's not really an abscess. It is a pyogenic abscess, and most likely it's an anaerobic abscess, or it's even a mixture of aerobic and facultative anaerobic abscesses. But we also know that because cytosolic amino acids is there, most likely it's not a staphylococcal abscess, because staphylococcus will eat up these cytosolic amino acids. So a lot of inference you can actually give the surgeon or the treating physician that you are actually looking at. So why we see these the succinate and acetate, or all these things, metabolites are actually a part of a Krebs citric acid cycle. So we told that this is a marker for anaerobic metabolism and anaerobic organisms we are talking about. Even when this is actually part of a Krebs citric acid cycle, this is a constantly being in the oxidative metabolism. It is constantly being actually metabolized. So in order to for us to actually detect these metabolites in the brain, it needs to be in a sufficient quantity. So we are detecting very minute quantities, but even then a sufficient quantity, minimum sufficient quantity is required. So in anaerobic metabolism, what happens is that the pyruvate, succinate, everything is getting accumulated, and you are actually seeing that. So that is why in anaerobic abscess you see a more of a succinate and acetate, and not in the aerobic abscess, even though it is a part of Krebs citric acid cycle. So some of the other metabolites, this is intraventricular meningioma. If you look at this T30, you see an upward peak. It could be at 1.3. This could be a tablet. This is because of the J coupling. You see lactate, because lactate and lipid both will be up in the 30. The lactate alone will precess down in 135. There is another small peak which is to the left of lactate, which is actually alanine, which is at 1.4 ppm. Oh, I'm sorry, 1.48 or 47 ppm, or near to 1.5. So this small peak, which if it is there with this appearance, it is a pathognomonic of a meningioma. But it is seen only in 40% of meningioma. How you confirm that this is an alanine? It is actually coming shorter in this thing, but it is actually going along the line of a lactate. You see lactate there. Along the lactate, there is another small peak, which is, then we do a long, really long T. This is a T at 270. You see again it is going up. So because of J coupling and this, the relationship of the phase differences which is occurring in the different T's, you can actually make sure that when particular metabolite you are actually looking at. So I'm 100% sure if you see this, that it's this particular appearance, this is an intraventricular meningioma. It's not a choroid plexus tumor. It's not a metastasis. It's an intraventricular meningioma. Even though it is seen only in 40% cases, if it is seen, it is really useful. So coming to, a lot of people talk a lot about spectroscopy in tuberculous abscesses and tuberculomas. If you see lactate and lipid, especially you see this lipid and lactate, because in 135 this in T30, this is upward peak can be L1 and L2, the lipid macromolecular complex and lactate together. But in 135 you can actually differentiate between lipid and lactate. There is a lactate is going down and lipid is going up, and you are pretty much sure that is most likely it is a tuberculous, either a liquid caseating tuberculoma or a tuberculous abscess. Both liquid caseating tuberculoma as well as tuberculous abscess can produce diffusion restriction, not only pyogenic abscesses. But the problem is that when you are actually putting a voxel here, you are also taking a voxel, so there is a voxel bleed chances from the scalp fat. So in the very superficial thing, the fat can normally be seen. If you put the spectroscopy from the opposite side where nothing is there, also you can sometimes see fat. So you should not be taken away by the fact that just because you are seeing some fat lipid macromolecular complexes, you are directly going in for making a diagnosis of tuberculosis or tuberculous abscesses. So this is a racemose cysticercosis. Again, you can see the lactate, alanine acetate, and succinate. This is Na and this is succinate at 2.4. This is succinate. Here you can see that the succinate is a higher peak compared to acetate, and this is a marker for parasitic infections, whereas in a pyogenic anaerobic infection, this acetate should be a higher peak than in a succinate. But having said that, in the previous case, we still saw a succinate higher peak. This may not work always as you wish. In small tuberculomas, if you see this lipid, again, you should be very, very careful and diagnosing, because the adjacent scalp fat contamination, which can actually show this throwaway this fat, which is just due to boxer bleeding. This is a CP angle lesion. It's a granuloma because it is a T2 hypointense lesion enhancing. We thought this is a tuberculoma. We saw some lipids, and we treated it for many months with antituberculous medication. Didn't respond. She was relatively doing okay. Then the surgeon decided to do an aspiration, and this is what happened as after aspiration, for a diagnostic aspiration with a stereotactic guided aspiration. The whole thing spilled and it produced an extensive meningitis, and this is the India Inc.'s preparation. This is Cryptococcus. So if you make a blind diagnosis of tuberculosis by this, and if you are actually doing this, this fungus also can produce an increased lipid, and this tremulous peak and all is described may not be always seen in a fungal abscess. So, and unfortunately, that patient who had a granuloma, patient was doing relatively okay, and after the biopsy, we produced a disseminated fungal meningitis, and patient succumbed to it. This is again an aspergillus abscess. You know that it's extending from, and you can see this diffusion sign, which is actually peripheral diffusion restriction and central facilitation, and a sort of granated appearance inside. And again, you can see a small, large lip. But you're not, you're supposed to see a triglyceride peak somewhere at 3.9, but second creatine peak also can come there. It's not really easy in clinical practice to differentiate between triglyceride peak in the published literature. If you directly contemplate in the clinical practice, it's not going to work. And in profound hypoxia in infants, lactate is a marker for a prognosis, but the problem is that currently, with head cooling, this lactate can be very variable, and the prognosis cannot be entirely predicted with the lactate. Having said that, there is another peak which can be seen, especially in neonates who are actually loaded with phenobarbital, especially with seizures. That should not be. This is lactate at 1.3 ppm. This is 1.1. This is a 1,2 papain diol, which is actually a preservative or a solvent preservative in barbiturates. So that also should be seen. This I have shown, I think, probably in the metabolic. If you see this picture, you are pretty sure that there is only one condition which can produce probably in the world. This is maple syrup urine disease. In maple syrup urine disease, there is a cytosolic amino acids are again getting accumulated, and the leucine of which is a toxin of a mylotoxin. That's why you see this MR appearance and the patient's condition. At a 0.9 ppm, you see this inverted peak, which is actually due to cytosolic amino acids, and this is really, really important in not only diagnosing but also following up this patient. If you hemodialyze and treat these patients, this first thing which comes down is actually the cytosolic amino acid with spectroscopy, not the MR appearance. MR appearance take months or even several weeks or months it will never normalize, but to reduce in edema and size, myelinic edema, but spectroscopy will be a good marker. There are other conditions which can specifically be diagnosed with the spectroscopy, like neonatal hyperglycinemia, where you see this corticospinal tract diffusion restriction. And you can see this glycine. Another very important peak at 3.56. It in both T as well as 1.5, 135 ppm scale. I mean T 135 and T30 or 130 or 144, depending on the machine you are talking about, is a glycine and myoinositol. Myoinositol is an astrocytic marker which is normally seen in neonates and also in the adult brain. So what happens is that the glycine, to differentiate, both these are located at 3.56, 3.57, that region. So it is not very easy to differentiate between myoinositol, normal myoinositol, and glycine in a pathological condition. How you do is that you do both T30 and 135, because if in T30 you see a myoinositol glycine peak, but in 135 myoinositol is supposed to reduce in size, because myoinositol, the T2 value of myoinositol is actually low. So it has to come. The glycine T2 value is higher, but the glycine peak persists in intermediate T spectroscopy. So if it persists, it is glycine and it is a very important marker for a neonatal hyperglycemia. So it's very important to diagnose this. And there is another tumor which can produce a high glycine content. This is central neurocytoma. This is if you are interested in learning about glycine, you can do central neurocytoma. It is very easy diagnosis. You don't need a spectroscopy to diagnose this. But if you see glycine, which is getting persistent in 135 T30 and persistent in 135, it's not minus at all, but it is glycine. And this condition also, I've told, this is one of the only conditions where the spectroscopy is an absolute must, and where you see a normal brain, patient has got a developmental delay, sometimes seizures, and if you do MRI brain, there can be minimal hypomyelination, but it is the spectroscopy you see very the marked absence of the creatine. If you see this is the creatine transporter deficiency, and with dietary supplementation you can actually treat it. A lot of people have the spectroscopy doubt about where you keep spectroscopy voxel in Mela syndrome or mitochondrial diseases. If you put up already this infarcted or mitochondrial abnormal area, you are always going to see lactate. If you are suspecting a mitochondrial disease, you have to put in the normal voxels, normal basal ganglia, normal ventricle, opposite side normal. If in the normal appearing brain, if lactate is seen, you are more confident that it is a mitochondrial disease. There are very limited role for looking at spectroscopy in epilepsy, especially temporal lobe imaging, but you should also know that there is a normal gradation of a choline as well as Na between the anterior to the posterior hippocampus, and you should be very careful in interpreting. Very interesting thing that this is when we put this cyst in the front of the brainstem, this could be an epidermoid cyst or a white epidermoid or a neuroenteric cyst with a high protein content. If you put the spectroscopy, you can see that the NAA peak is high. You are not expecting an NAA from this cyst because it is a neuronal marker. We initially thought it is a voxel bleed from the adjacent cerebellar tissue or brainstem tissue, but it is not. We did the aspirate and we did the microscopy with NMR spectroscopy of this, and we found that the peak remains, and it was proved to be N-acetyl sugars, and which can be seen in duplication cysts, especially bronchogenic cysts, which is published later. And this is because N-acetyl sugars are present in these cysts, and this is a very important marker for actually looking at this. It is very important in ovarian cysts and also metastasis from mucinous adenocarcinomas, and we have proved this and published also. And what you see as Na is not always N-acetyl aspartate. It is only this N-acetyl group which can be seen in multiple conditions. For example, in Canavan's disease, you still see Na increase, but and this is the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, which is secreting this mucin, which is rich in these sugars. That's why you see Na-like peak, and it's very important, which is a marker which can differentiate from epidermoid cyst. This very recently we have done this case, 62-year-old male patient with recent organ dementia with frontal lobe symptoms and mild facial weakness, large cystic lesion, extraaxial, but there is a dural enhancement. We thought it's a cystic meningioma. Even perfusion is increased in the margins, susceptibility changes, and there are some debris inside the cyst. And if you look at the spectrum, there is a peak which is inverted at the 2 ppm, and that is not normal. This is what happens. This is the importance of phase correction. So in 2 ppm inverted, we are not aware of any peaks, but if you do correction, this outside you see the normal Na. Inside the cyst, you still see a peak within the 2. But this is just a phase reverse because of the error, and the technologists can actually do a phase correction. And if you do the phase correction, you can see that the Na is actually going up, and this is phase corrected Na, and still this is another case of a neuroenteric cyst, a very complex variety of neuroenteric cyst. 2-hydroxyglutarate may be useful in the research sequence in order to understand the newer variants of tumors, but it is not very easy to do. Again, we have some publications on functional spectroscopy on brain working memory, where the glutamate level is increasing. These are research applications, not really useful for clinical applications. The quality of the take-home message, the quality of the spectrum is very important. You should have a high order shim in your machine. The take care of shimming and technical considerations and post-processing is also very important. Never interpret MR spectroscopy images in isolation, and